The Chimera was less a starship and more a testament to stubbornness, a constellation of mismatched parts flying in loose formation, held together by Reese's caustic wit and 1,000 kilometers of plasma-welded seams. It was born from the carcass of a long-haul freighter, its spine now fused with the sensor array of a forgotten patrol craft and the engines of a mining rig that should have been decommissioned a century ago. It was an ugly, asymmetrical beast, scarred by micrometeoroids and coated in the fine, greasy dust of dead nebulae. It smelled of recycled air, ozone, and Reese's ever-present simmering frustration. This rust-pocked corner of the void was their home. A ghost ship haunting the graveyards of a war humanity had lost so decisively it was now relegated to a footnote in the grand, sterile archives of the Vex ascendancy. Kalen stood on the cramped bridge, the starlight filtering through the reinforced plasteel viewport looking tired and ancient. The light illuminated the swirling dust motes and the worn-out decal of a forgotten Earth continent on his jacket sleeve. He wasn't a captain, not really. He was a keeper of ghosts, a former junior archivist from a library on a moon that no longer existed, and the Chimera was his wandering mausoleum. Below them, tethered by magnetic grapples, was the skeletal ruin of the Starfall, a human frigate from the final, feudal days of the war. Its hull was peeled back like a ribcage, exposing the dark, silent chambers within. Anything. Kalen's voice was quiet, a stark contrast to the groaning symphony of the Chimera's life support. He spoke into the comms, his gaze fixed on the derelict ship. Jin's voice crackled back, laced with static and sarcasm. Just shattered dreams and a whole lot of floating scrap. The reactor core is slag. The weapon systems are vaporized. And I think a family of void spiders has taken up residence in the mess hall. We might be able to pull a few intact power conduits, but it's slim pickings. Another bust. Kalen felt the familiar pang of disappointment. They survived on the dregs of the past, picking over the bones of humanity's last stand for anything that could be traded, repurposed, or consumed. It was a bleak existence, a slow-motion surrender to the Vex's new order, an order that had no place for human history, only human labor in designated production zones. Jin was the pragmatist, the one who saw the universe in terms of profit and loss, fuel and rations. She was born in the black, a child of the asteroid belts who had never seen a blue sky, and her piloting was an extension of that brutal upbringing, instinctive, sharp, and utterly unforgiving. She navigated the Chimera through debris fields with a grace the ship itself did not deserve. Reese, from his grease-stained nest in engineering, added his own 2 credits over the comm. Tell her to check the tertiary plasma regulators. Starfall-class frigates had a nasty habit of routing them through the aft sanitation block. The Vex bombardments usually missed those. Filthy, but functional. Reese was the ship's beating, complaining heart. He was old enough to remember the world before the Vex, a time of crowded sky lanes and a dozen different human colonies, each with its own songs and stories. Now, all those stories were prescribed data, branded as seditious lies by the ascendancy. His cynicism was a fortress built around a core of grief. I treated the Chimera's failing systems with the same tender abuse a man might show a dying, beloved pet. Kalen was about to tell Jin to wrap it up when her voice came back. Different this time, stripped of its usual irony. Hold on. I've found something. In the captain's quarters, or what's left of them. Sealed compartment behind the bunk, lead-lined, military grade. It's not on any schematic I can pull up. Kalen felt a spark ignite in the cold vacuum of his chest. It was a dangerous feeling, one he'd learned to suppress. "Hope, what is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. There was a pause, filled with the sound of her prying at the compartment with a cutting torch. Then, a metallic shriek and a grunt of effort. "It's a data core," she said. "A heavy one. Armored casing. No markings. No Vex compliance sigils. This thing is old." Reese's voice grumbled over the comm. "A data core, we need engine parts, not ghost stories. Leave it. The power drain to crack that kind of encryption will cost us more in fuel than we'll ever get from selling whatever's on it." Kalen ignored him. "Bring it back. Jin, bring it back now." He could feel the weight of Reese's disapproval through the deck plates, but this was different. Military data cores were usually wiped remotely during a ship's final moments. A sealed, hidden one was an anomaly, a secret someone had died to protect. For an archivist, a secret was a sacred thing. Back on the Chimera, the data core sat on the main console table like a dark, silent monolith. It was heavier than it looked, its surface cold and smooth, absorbing the light of the flickering overhead panels. Jin leaned against a bulkhead, arms crossed, watching Kalen with a wary expression. "Whatever's in there, it's not worth dying for. Kalen ran a hand over the core's surface. "We don't know that. The Vex didn't just conquer us, Jin. They're erasing us. They tear down our monuments, burn our books, and tell our children that humanity was a scattered, primitive species they benevolently uplifted. They lie. Anything that proves them liars is worth more than fuel or parts." He turned to the ship's AI interface, a simple or glowing blue circle on the console. "Lazarus, can you interface with this?" The AI's voice, when it came, was a calm, synthesized baritone, a strange amalgam of salvaged vocal patterns from a Golden Age colony ship it had been ripped from. It often spoke with a detached, philosophical air that Reese found infuriating. The object's architecture is archaic, yet elegant. Pre-ascendancy human encryption. Brute force decryption would require approximately 7 standard years and would likely cook our primary processing unit. Reese snorted from the doorway to the bridge. "Told you, it's a paperweight." Kalen's jaw tightened. "There has to be another way. Lazarus, analyze the casing. Look for manufacturer's marks. Anything." The AI paused. "There is a micro-etching near the primary port. A sequence is not a standard access code. It appears to be a line of text." Kalen leaned closer. "What does it say?" Lazarus's serene voice recited the ancient words. "To see a world in a grain of sand." It was a line from an old Earth poem, one Kalen had memorized from a forbidden text file years ago. It was a password, a key made not of numbers, but of poetry, of memory. His fingers trembled as he typed the corresponding phrase into the decryption interface, and a heaven in a wildflower. The core hummed to life. The encryption, a fortress of military-grade code, simply dissolved. On the main screen, data began to scroll. Not weapon schematics or fleet movements, but something far more potent. It was a memory locus, a cultural seed bank from a colony called Eden Prime. There were recordings of children's laughter, the chemical composition of the colony's unique flowers, thousands of books, symphonies, personal video logs of births and birthdays, and a complete, unredacted history of the human expansion into the Perseus arm. It was a world in a grain of sand, a world the Vex Ascendancy officially claimed had never existed, a fairy tale told by seditious rebels. This data core was heresy incarnate. My God, Kalen breathed, his eyes wide with a terrible, beautiful reverence. They hadn't found a weapon. They had found a soul. Jin took a step forward, her cynicism momentarily forgotten as she watched the images flash across the screen faces of people smiling under a yellow sun. Street festivals, art galleries. I've never seen so many people. Reese just stood in the doorway, his face pale, his hard-won apathy cracking like thin ice. He was looking at a ghost, the ghost of everything they had lost. It was Lazarus who broke the spell. Warning, the AI stated, its calm tone making the words even more chilling. The decryption process generated a cascade of subspace energy. The signature was minute and brief, but its frequency is consistent with pre-ascendancy technology. There is a Vex vessel in the adjacent sector, a Purifier-class Sentinel. Its probability of detecting the signature is 4.7%. Reese swore, the color draining from his face. 4.7%. With our luck, that's a goddamn certainty. They're coming for us. Purifiers weren't warships. They were sanitizers. Their job was to hunt down and sterilize pockets of human cultural resistance. They didn't take prisoners. They cauterized history. Jin was already at the helm, her hands flying across the controls. Strap in. We're getting out of here. The Chimera's engines coughed to life with a shudder that vibrated through the entire ship. It's too late, Lazarus reported, its tone unchanged. The Vex vessel has altered its course. It is accelerating in our direction. Estimated time to contact 12 minutes. 12 minutes. The bridge was suddenly a tomb. The beautiful images of Eden Prime still flickered on the screen, a cruel reminder of what they were about to die for. The Vex ship appeared on the long-range scanner, a sleek, blade-like icon of absolute authority cutting through the void. It was impossibly fast, a predator closing in on its prey. They're hailing us, Jin said, her knuckles white on the controls. Standard Ascendancy Protocol. Demand we power down and prepare for inspection. Kalen looked at the data core, then at the faces of his crew, their expressions a mixture of fear and defiance. Surrender meant the core would be destroyed, and they would be sent to a reclamation camp, their memories wiped, their identities scoured away until they were just another set of compliant hands for the Ascendancy. Death was a better option. No, Kalen said, his voice hard as salvaged steel. We run. Jin gave him a sharp, predatory grin. Finally, something I'm good at. She slammed the throttle forward, pushing the Chimera's patchwork engines to their screaming limit. The ship lurched, protesting the abuse, and plunged headlong into the densest part of the Starfall's wreckage field. Reese, I need everything you've got, she yelled. If these engines blow, I'm haunting you first. Reese's voice came back, strained but steady. Just fly the damn ship, girl. I'll hold it together with spit and prayer if I have to. The Vexus Purifier followed, its movements fluid and precise, a stark contrast to the Chimera's lumbering desperation. Plasma bolts, glowing green and deadly, began to lance through the debris around them, vaporizing chunks of the old frigate. One bolt struck their aft section, and the entire ship screamed in protest. Lights flickered, and a section of the bridge went dark. We've lost the port stabilizer, Reese yelled. She's going to handle like a drunk rhino. Jin didn't flinch. She used the impact to create the sudden lurch to whip the Chimera around a massive, spinning piece of hull plating, using it as a temporary shield. It was a move of pure, suicidal genius. The pursuing plasma bolts slammed into the plating, shattering it into a million smaller pieces. Lazarus, Kalen shouted. Find me a way out. The AI's blue light pulsed. The Starfall's main reactor is destabilized but not inert. A focused energy discharge into its containment field could, theoretically, trigger a cascading overload. The resulting electromagnetic pulse would blind the Vex vessel, but the kinetic blast would also likely atomize us. A suicide play. A final, defiant gesture. But Kalen saw another option. Jin, get us close to the reactor housing. As close as you dare. Jin's eyes widened, but she didn't question him. She wrestled with the controls, forcing the wounded Chimera through a storm of shrapnel. Weaving a path that should have been impossible, the Purifier stayed on them, relentless, its weapons carving a path of destruction. They were seconds from being torn apart. Now, Reese, Kalen commanded, fire the magnetic grapple, not at the reactor, at the conduit right next to it. Full power surge on release. Reese understood instantly. It wasn't about blowing the reactor, it was about using their salvaging tool as a weapon. The grapple shot out, a metal claw on a tether, and clamped onto a thick power conduit running along the outside of the reactor housing. Surging, Reese roared, an ungodly amount of power, stolen directly from their own engines, flooded the grapple line. The conduit on the Starfall exploded, not with the force of a full reactor breach, but with a directed, violent burst of raw energy. The dead frigate bucked, and a wave of pure electromagnetic chaos erupted outwards. On their screen, the Vex's ship's icon vanished in a wash of static. Their sensors were blinded. Jin didn't waste the opportunity. She pushed the throttle past the red line, and the Chimera, battered and bleeding energy, shot out of the wreckage field and into the concealing darkness of deep space. They had escaped, but only just. The ship was a wreck. Their fuel was critical, and the Vex now knew someone had salvaged the Starfall. They were no longer invisible junkers, picking at the edges of the galaxy. They were fugitives. They were rebels. They were the last librarians of a history the most powerful empire in the galaxy wanted to see turn to ash. And their little rust bucket ship, the Chimera, was now the most dangerous library in existence. The silence on the Chimera was heavier than any hull breach. It was the sound of a gamble won and a future lost. The quiet hum of systems stretched to their breaking point. Reese's initial damage report was a litany of despair, a poem written in plasma burns and fractured conduits. The port engine was coughing out coolant like a dying man spitting blood. The aft sensors were a ghost of their former selves, and the structural integrity around the main cargo bay was, in his technical assessment, held together by wishful thinking and a few stubborn rivets. They were adrift, a wounded animal bleeding energy into the void, with less than a full cycle's worth of fuel in their tanks. The memory locus of Eden Prime, still glowing softly on the console, felt less like a prize and more like a tombstone they were dragging along with them. Jin had nursed the ship into the shadow of a rogue gas giant, a swirling behemoth of methane and ammonia ice that would hopefully mask their heat signature from any lingering Vex patrols. She hadn't left the helm, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the void with a hunter's intensity. It was Kalen who finally broke the quiet. Where do we go? The question hung in the recycled air, simple and impossible. Every official port, every trade hub, every fueling station was under ascendancy control. Docking at any of them would be suicide. Their ship's patched-up signature was now undoubtedly flagged, marked for immediate seizure and sanitization. Reese emerged from the engine room, wiping a black, viscous fluid from his hands onto an already filthy rag. His face was grim, etched with lines of exhaustion. There's nowhere to go. We're a ghost with a Vex bounty on our head. We can't run, we can't fight, and we can't hide forever. We have enough fuel to make one jump. Maybe 1.5 if I bypass the life support recyclers, which I don't recommend unless you enjoy breathing your own farts for a week. Jin swiveled in her chair, her expression sharp. There's one place, but you're not going to like it. Reese let out a tired, humorless laugh. Girl, at this point, I'd dock in the belly of a void kraken if it had a working power socket. Spit it out. Jin's gaze flickered to Kalen. The Tangle. Reese's brief flicker of humor died instantly. He leaned against the console, the metal groaning under his weight. No, absolutely not. Anywhere but there. Kalen looked between them. He'd only ever heard of the Tangle in hushed whispers, a boogeyman story told by spacers to scare rookies. A graveyard of ships from a dozen species, all lashed together in the chaotic orbit of a collapsed star. A lawless city built from wreckage and desperation. Why not? Kalen asked. What is it? It's a cancer, Reese said, his voice low. It's where principals go to die. It's run by Silas, a human who got rich selling out her own kind during the war. She traded information, ship movements, colony locations, anything for a price. When the Ascendancy won, they let her keep her little scrap heap kingdom as a reminder of what happens when humans turn on each other. She deals in secrets, K, and she peels them out of you layer by layer until there's nothing left. We go there with that data core, and she'll have it off us before we can even ask for a docking clamp. Jin countered, her tone level. She also has the best independent shipwrights this side of the core worlds. She has fuel, parts, and a sensor-baffling field of wreckage that the Vex won't touch unless they have to. She's a monster, Reese, but she's a predictable monster. She values one thing above all else: leverage. She won't turn us in if we're more valuable to her free. Kalen looked at the blinking fuel gauge, then at the silent data core. Reese was right to be afraid. Silas sounded like a predator, but Jin was right too. They were out of options. Their ideals had gotten them this far, but only pragmatism would get them through the next cycle. Set a course for the Tangle, Kalen said, his voice betraying none of the cold dread that was coiling in his stomach. Reese just shook his head and shuffled back toward his engine room, muttering about making deals with devils. Approaching the Tangle was like flying into a nightmare's junkyard. It wasn't a station, it was an accretion disk of salvaged history. The skeletal remains of a Vex battlecruiser formed its spine, its weapon ports now retrofitted into docking bays. Ancient human colony ships, their cryopods long since looted, were fused to its sides, their domed habitats now serving as hydroponic farms or black market bazaars. 1,000 smaller vessels, from sleek alien scout ships to clunky asteroid miners, clung to the structure like barnacles, connected by a chaotic web of pressurized tunnels and exposed gantries. The entire mass glittered with 1,000 mismatched lights, a swarm of fireflies in a tomb. Lazarus, in its usual detached manner, commented, "The structural integrity of this conglomeration is a statistical improbability. It should not exist." Jin navigated them through the debris field with practiced ease, her comms channel open and broadcasting their forged transponder code, a defunct mining guild from a forgotten sector. A voice, gravelly and synthesized, crackled back. "Chimera. Your guild charter expired 3 decades ago. State your real business or become part of the local scenery." Jin didn't miss a beat. "We're here to see Silas. We have an item for trade. Something she'll find illuminating." There was a long pause, filled with the hiss of static. Then, Bay 74 Gamma. and try not to scratch the paint. Hers, not yours. The docking bay was a cavernous space carved out of the engine block of a war-era dreadnought. Figures moved in the shadows, their forms augmented with crude cybernetics, their eyes watching the Chimera with predatory curiosity. Kalen, Jin, and Reese disembarked, leaving Lazarus to maintain the ship's minimal systems and, more importantly, to safeguard the memory locus. The air in the tangle smelled of ozone, unidentifiable alien spices, and desperation. The meeting with Silas took place in what had once been the command bridge of the Vex battlecruiser, a vast, vaulted chamber with a panoramic viewport showing the swirling chaos of the station outside. Silas sat not on a throne, but in a modified Vex command chair, its sleek, alien lines contrasting with her very human, very tired appearance. She was older than Kalen had expected, her face a roadmap of hard decisions, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a simple, functional jumpsuit, but her eyes were ancient and sharp, missing nothing. A pair of hulking, cybernetically enhanced guards stood behind her, their stillness more menacing than any open threat. "The heroes of the hour," Silas said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. She gestured to a series of smaller screens floating beside her chair. One showed the Chimera, heavily damaged. Another showed a Vex bulletin, offering a substantial reward for information on the terrorist vessel that had destroyed the Starfall wreckage. "You've made a mess, Kalen, former archivist of a library that is now dust, and you've brought that mess to my doorstep." Kalen met her gaze. "We need repairs, fuel, sanctuary." Silas steepled her fingers. "Sanctuary is a lovely word. It sounds so noble. I, on the other hand, am a businesswoman. Your ship is a liability. Your crew are fugitives. Why should I take on your risk?" This was the moment, the reason they were here. "Because of what we have," Kalen said. "We found something in the Starfall, something the Vex want buried." Silas raised a skeptical eyebrow. "A weapon, a secret fleet manifest, old news, archivist. The war is over. We lost." Kalen shook his head. "History. A complete, uncorrupted data core from Eden Prime. Proof that everything the Ascendancy builds its legitimacy on is a lie." For the first time, a flicker of genuine interest appeared in Silas's eyes. She leaned forward, the command chair humming softly. "Eden Prime. That's not a ghost story. That's a heresy. A very dangerous heresy to possess. Hand it over. In return, I will repair your ship, give you new transponder codes, and enough fuel to disappear into the outer rim." Reese tensed beside him, ready to protest, but Kalen had anticipated this. He had lain awake for the entire journey, running through this exact conversation. To give her the core was to lose. To refuse was to die. So he had to change the game. "No," Kalen said simply. Silas's eyes narrowed. "That is a bold and foolish answer." "The core is worthless if it's not shared," Kalen continued, his voice gaining strength. "It's not a commodity. It's a message. We are its messengers. And right now, you are the only one who can give us a voice. We don't want to disappear. We want to be heard." A slow smile spread across Silas's face. It was not a pleasant sight. "Oh, you are much more interesting than I thought. You don't want a hiding place. You want a stage. And you think I'm going to provide it out of some latent sense of human solidarity." She laughed, a short, sharp bark. "I have no solidarity. I have assets and liabilities. Right now, You are a liability, but you could be an asset. She swiped a hand, and a new image appeared on the screen, a Vex communications relay, orbiting a red dwarf star in a system designated Baron 7. The Ascendancy is tightening its grip. They've been installing these new relays across the pacified sectors. They don't just transmit data, they scrub it. They broadcast the Ascendancy's truth, overriding local networks, news feeds, historical archives. They are the engine of the Vex's great forgetting. She looked back at Kaylin, her eyes glinting. That relay is a new model. Its encryption is a generation ahead of anything I've been able to crack. I want the master encryption key from its central node. It will give me a back door into their entire sector-wide network. Leverage, she said, savoring the word. Bring me that key, and I will not only repair your rust bucket, I will give you what you want, a stage. I will slice a tiny fraction of the data from your precious core just a taste, a single image, a line of text, and using the key you bring me, I will inject it into the Vex network. It will flash across 1,000 worlds for a few seconds just before they can scrub it. It will be a whisper, a rumor, a ghost in their perfect, sterile machine. It will prove to the galaxy that humanity's past is not dead. She leaned back. The deal laid bare. It was a devil's bargain. She would use them to further her own information empire, and in return, they would get to fire the first shot in a war of memory. They would have to fly into a Vex-controlled system, board a military installation, and steal the heart of its security, all in a ship that was barely holding together. It was an impossible, suicidal task. We have a deal, Kaylin said, without hesitation. Jin shot him a look that was equal parts admiration and fury. Reese just looked like he was going to be sick. Silas smiled again. Excellent. My mechanics will give you just enough repairs to get you there. Don't mistake my investment for charity. You succeed. You become a legend. You fail. She gestured vaguely at the junkyard outside. You become salvage. Now get off my bridge. You're leaking desperation all over the deck plates. As they walked back to the Chimera Tower, the sounds of the tangle echoing around them, Jin fell into step beside Kaylin. A whisper. Kay, we're going to risk our lives for a whisper. Kaylin looked out at the chaotic, broken city of ships, a testament to a galaxy full of the forgotten and the outcast. A whisper is how an avalanche begins, Saw, he said. And we are long overdue for a storm. The Chimera limped away from the tangle, not so much repaired as crudely bandaged. Silas's mechanics had worked with a brutal, functional efficiency, slapping cold welded patches over the worst of the hull breaches and jury-rigging the power couplings with a shocking disregard for safety protocols. The port engine no longer hemorrhaged coolant, but it whined with a high, mournful pitch that set Reese's teeth on edge. He stood in his engine room, surrounded by the ghosts of his old, reliable systems, now desecrated by the hasty, ugly work of scavengers. He saw it as a physical manifestation of their deal with Silas, a temporary fix that solved one problem by creating a dozen more. A scar that would forever remind them of the compromise they'd made. The journey to the Baron 7 system was thick with the tension that the ship's groaning hull seemed to echo. Jin was a coiled spring at the helm, running silent, deep space maneuvers that kept them far from established shipping lanes. Her focus was absolute, a shield against the crushing weight of their odds. It was Reese who finally gave voice to the crew's simmering resentment, storming onto the bridge with a greasy rag clenched in his fist like a weapon. "Do you hear that?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that cut through the engine's whine. That's the sound of our soul being sold for scrap. We didn't just get repairs, Kay. We got a leash. Every one of those patches, every one of those rerouted power lines is substandard. She gave us just enough to get to that relay, and not a meter farther. We're her disposable tool, a crowbar she's using to pry open a lock. If we break, she'll just find another. He threw the rag onto the console, leaving a dark smear. We survived the Vex. We survived the Void, just to become errand boys for a traitor. Kalen turned from the viewport, where the distant, angry red of the barren 7-star was just beginning to resolve from the background of the cosmos. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a fire Reese hadn't seen before. She thinks we're a tool. The Vex think we're a footnote. That's our advantage. They're both wrong. What's on that core isn't just a story. Reese, it's gravity. It's proof that we existed, that we built something beautiful. The Vex universe is built on a lie so vast it feels like the truth. All it takes is one undeniable fact to make the whole structure start to crack. That's what this is. Not an errand. It's a chisel. We're going to find the first crack in their perfect wall and hammer it until it screams. His words didn't extinguish Reese's anger, but they banked it, turning it from a wildfire into a focused, burning coal of purpose. Even Jin glanced back from the helm, a flicker of something like approval in her sharp eyes. Lazarus chose that moment to display the schematics Silas had provided on the main screen. They were incomplete, riddled with gaps, likely all she had been able to acquire on the black market. The relay, designated Echo Point 734, was a dagger of polished, black material, seamless and self-contained. It had no docking bays, no visible hatches, no signs of life. It was a monument to silent, absolute control. The structure's only accessible entry points are a series of thermal exhaust ports. Lazarus stated, its serene voice a chilling counterpoint to the hostile design. They cycle open for 3.7 seconds every 48 minutes to vent excess heat from the core. The aperture is too small for the Chimera. Furthermore, the relay is protected by a quantum sensor grid. Any vessel with an active reactor core that crosses the perimeter will be instantly vaporized. Jin traced a line on the screen with her finger. So, we don't use the Chimera. The plan formed in the space between them, a desperate piece of improvisation built from necessity. They would use the Scarab, their tiny one-person atmospheric skiff, which was usually latched to the Chimera's belly for planetary surveys they never got to perform. Reese would have to modify it, stripping it down to its barest components, replacing its power source with a series of high-capacity batteries that would give them one short, silent burst of life. They would detach from the Chimera in the shadow of a large asteroid in the system's outer belt, coast in on battery power, and Jin would pilot the Scarab through the vent during its brief open cycle. It was a plan with 1,000 points of failure. The hours that followed were a blur of frantic activity. Reese worked with a furious, focused energy, cursing and coaxing the Scarab systems into their new, suicidal configuration. Kalen and Jin stripped out every non-essential component, turning the cramped cockpit into a space barely large enough for the three of them and their gear. As they approached the relay, the Chimera went dark. All non-essential systems powered down, hiding in the sensor shadow of a frozen chunk of rock. The three of them crammed into the modified Scarab, the air already thick with the smell of hot electronics and their own nervous sweat. The detachment was a silent, jarring lurch. One moment they were part of the Chimera. The next they were a tiny, though powerless tin can adrift in an ocean of black. Jin's hands were steady on the controls as she guided them on a long, silent trajectory toward the Vex relay. It grew in their viewport from a sliver of darkness to an imposing, artificial mountain. "Approaching the perimeter!" Lazarus's voice, transmitted from the chimera, whispered in their earpieces. "Venting cycle begins in 90 seconds. The inside of the relay was a stark, chilling contrast to the human chaos of their ship. The corridors were perfect tubes of a soft, white, self-repairing polymer, illuminated by light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. There was no dust, Vislas. There's no scuff marks, no sign of passage. The only sound was a low, subliminal hum, the sound of unimaginable power held in perfect stasis. They moved in silence, their mag boots clanking softly on the deck, a vulgar intrusion in this sterile temple. Their goal was the central node, located deep in the heart of the structure. The incomplete schematics showed a direct path, but reality was proving more complex. Automated sentinels, silent, floating discs that patrolled the corridors with cold, blue optical sensors, forced them into maintenance shafts and secondary conduits. Reese, his earlier anger now channeled into focused brilliance, bypassed security junctions with a custom-built slicer, his fingers dancing over holographic interfaces that were never designed for human hands. Jin took point, her salvaged pulse rifle held at the ready, her eyes scanning every intersection, her body moving with an innate understanding of angles and cover. They had one close call. As they rounded a corner, they froze. Down the long, white corridor, a Vex attendant was gliding towards them. It was not a soldier. It was tall and unnervingly slender, its limbs moving with an insectoid grace. It wore a simple, gray robe, and its head was a smooth, featureless ovoid that seemed to absorb the light. It carried no weapon. It simply tended to the station, a silent priest in the Church of Information. Jin pulled them back into an alcove, her breath held tight in her chest. They pressed themselves against the wall as the attendant passed, its soft, gliding footsteps making no sound. It didn't even turn its head. They were beneath its notice, an irrelevant contamination it hadn't yet been programmed to perceive. The encounter left them shaken. The Vex weren't just conquerors, they were a force of profound, alien indifference. Finally, they reached the chamber of the central node. It was a vast, spherical room. In the center, suspended in a web of shimmering energy fields, was the master encryption key. It was not a piece of hardware, but a living construct of data, a slowly rotating, multifaceted crystal of pure light that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic beat. It was beautiful and terrible, the heart of the Vex's power in this sector. "All right," Reese whispered, his voice filled with a reluctant awe. "I have to get close. The siphon needs to make a direct connection with the energy field." He unslung the device he'd built, a complex mess of wires and salvaged Vex components, and began to move slowly across the gantry that led to the central crystal. Kalen and Jin stood guard, watching the two entryways to the chamber. The air hummed with power. Reese reached the edge of the platform and carefully extended the siphon. A magnetic claw at its tip latched onto the containment field with a soft click. "I'm in," he breathed, starting the download. "This is going to take a minute. The sheer density of this data is—" His voice trailed off. On his wrist-mounted monitor, a progress bar began to fill, agonizingly slowly. 30%, 40. The crystal in the center of the room seemed to brighten, its rhythmic pulse quickening. 50%. The hum in the room grew louder, changing pitch into something that sounded less like power and more like a warning. 60%. "Something's wrong," Jin hissed, her rifle sweeping across the sealed doorways. We've been too quiet. 70%. Almost there, Reese muttered, his brow beaded with sweat. Just a few more seconds. Suddenly, every light in the room shifted from sterile white to a deep, alarming crimson. The low hum became a piercing, high-frequency shriek that vibrated through their bones. Thick, black metal shutters slammed down over both doorways with a deafening clang, sealing them in. They were trapped. Silent alarm, Jin swore, checking the seals. They knew we were here. Before Kalen could respond, a section of the far wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing a hidden alcove. From the darkness within, a new figure emerged. It was not an attendant. It was taller, robed in black, its form disturbingly similar to the silent priest's, but its head was a terrifying, intricate lattice of glowing silver filaments and crystalline lenses, all focused on them. It carried no weapon. Its hands, long and multi-jointed, were clasped peacefully before it. A new voice filled their minds, not through their comms, but directly. A cold, serene thought that was utterly alien. The archive is closed, it projected. Your overdue items are now to be recatalogued. Reese stared, his hands frozen over the siphon. The download stalled at 84%. This wasn't a guard, it was a librarian, and they had just been caught trying to steal the most forbidden book in its collection. The Vex librarian, a silent adjudicator of a history it was actively unwriting, glided into the chamber. At every movement was a study in serene, implacable purpose. The silver latticework of its head tilted, and the crystalline lenses within shifted, focusing on each of them in turn. An act of appraisal that felt as invasive as a physical violation. The telepathic voice, devoid of emotion yet heavy with absolute authority, echoed in their minds again. You seek a key, little echoes, but you do not understand the lock, the information you carry, the memories you cherish. They are a sickness, a chaotic variable in a stable equation. We are the cure. It raised one of its long, delicate hands, and the air around Reese shimmered. The siphon he was holding began to glow cherry red, the metal overheating at an impossible rate. "Reese, get back!" Jin yelled, but her voice was a distant thing, a sound from another world compared to the overwhelming presence in their minds. Reese cried out, dropping the device as it began to melt. The download frozen agonizingly at 84%. The incomplete data was a useless and corrupted fragment. They had failed. "There is no escape," the librarian projected, its thought voice calm and final. "Only correction." It began to advance, and the white polymer floor beneath its feet seemed to ripple, flowing like liquid to form tendrils that snaked towards them, hardening into restraints. This wasn't a fight. It was a process, an act of sterile, automated containment. Kalen's mind, however, was racing. He wasn't a soldier like Jin or an engineer like Reese. He was an archivist. His weapons weren't guns or tools. They were patterns, connections, and the deep, abiding truth that every system, no matter how perfect, has a flaw. He looked from the librarian to the pulsating crystal of the master key. It was a key to their network, a tool of control. But what did it control? Lazarus Kalen sub-vocalized into his comm, a desperate, whispered prayer. The core, the memory locus. Can you push data through our comm signal? Not all of it. Just one file, a small one. And the AI's response was immediate, a lifeline in the silent chaos. The bandwidth is minimal, and it is possible. Which file? The librarian was closer now, the polymer tendrils reaching for their ankles. Jin fired her pulse rifle, but the bolts of energy simply dissipated a few inches from the creature's body, absorbed by some invisible field. The Vex don't value history, Kalen thought. A desperate idea taking shape. They value data. Pure, ordered data. Lazarus, he whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. Send the file prime symphony no 3.ud. Maximum compression. Route it through the incomplete siphon data. Force the connection. It was a mad gamble, an archivist's last stand. He was betting that the Vex system, for all its perfection, had a blind spot. It was designed to process and control information, but perhaps not to understand it. Reese, seeing the desperate resolve in Kalen's eyes, scrambled back to the still glowing siphon. He didn't know the plan. He snatched up the device, the metal searing his gloves, and slammed it back onto the containment field. Forcing the upload, he yelled, overriding the failed download sequence. A new progress bar appeared on his monitor, this one filling with terrifying speed. The librarian paused, its head tilting again, a gesture of mild, alien curiosity. Unidentified data packet, unscheduled, incoherent. The music of Eden Prime, a soaring, complex symphony of hope and sorrow, a piece of art created for no other reason than to express the chaotic, illogical beauty of the human soul, began to flood into the heart of the Vex relay. It wasn't code. It wasn't a weapon. It was pure, unstructured, emotional information. It was noise in the perfect machine. The crystal of the master key flickered. Its steady, rhythmic pulse faltered, becoming erratic. The crimson lights in the chamber strobed, and the piercing shriek of the alarm wavered, dropping in pitch. The librarian took a step back, a gesture of profound unease. The telepathic voice in their heads fractured, splintering into a chorus of confused, overlapping thoughts. Incoherent, paradox, data without function, illogical pattern, pain. What is pain? The symphony reached its crescendo, a blast of triumphant horns and strings that had once brought a concert hall of colonists to their feet, weeping with joy. Inside the Vex relay, it was a cataclysm. The central crystal flared with a blinding white light, then went dark. The hum of the station died, plunging them into a sudden, shocking silence. The emergency lights flickered back on, bathing the room in a dim, uncertain glow. The librarian was frozen, its silver head twitching, the lenses in its crystalline face spinning wildly, trying to process the illogical, emotional data that had just torn through its core programming. It was a machine that had just been forced to confront a ghost. The polymer tendrils on the floor went limp, receding back into the walls. The shutters over the doorways retracted with a groan. They were free. "What did you do?" Jin breathed, staring at the catatonic librarian. "I think," Kalen said, his voice shaking with the aftershock of his gamble. "I just taught it the blues." Reese was already working on the now inert siphon. The key is dead. The master file is gone, corrupted by the feedback loop. But the siphon, it still has the fragment, the 84%. It's not the whole key, but it's enough. Kalen finished, a grim smile on his face. Silas wanted a key to open a door. We're bringing her a battering ram. Their escape from the relay was a tense, hurried affair. They didn't know how long the system would be down. They moved back through the silent, darkened corridors. The absence of the constant hum more unnerving than its presence had been. They reached the exhaust port just as the alarm klaxons began to blare again. A new, angrier sound. The system was rebooting. Jin piloted the Scarab out of the vent with milliseconds to spare, pushing the small craft's batteries to their absolute limit on a desperate, silent run back to the asteroid field. They docked with the Chimera. The clang of the magnetic clamps, the most beautiful sound Kalen had ever heard. Back on the bridge, the weight of what they had just done began to sink in. They hadn't just stolen from the Vex. They had violated them. They had infected their perfect, sterile system with a piece of human art, a virus of memory and emotion. It was an act of cultural terrorism, and the Ascendancy would never forgive it. The journey back to the Tangle was a funeral procession for their anonymity. They were no longer just fugitives. They were a symbol, a new and dangerous kind of rebel. When they arrived, Silas was waiting for them on her command bridge, her expression unreadable. She had seen the Vex bulletins. She knew the Echo Point relay had gone dark. "Report," she said, her voice flat. Reese stepped forward and slapped the siphon down on her console. The master key was destroyed. This is all we got. 84%. A corrupted fragment. Silas picked up the device, her cyberneticists swarming around it, plugging it into their own systems. She studied the readouts for a long, tense moment. Her face remained a mask. Kalen braced himself for her anger, for the deal to be declared void. He expected to be cast out, or worse. But then, a slow but predatory smile spread across Silas's face. "Destroyed," she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "Oh, Archivist, you've done so much better than that." She turned to her main console. A complete key would have been traceable. They would have expected it, patched against it. But a corrupted fragment, a key that is broken in just the right way, that is a tool of chaos. She began to type, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. This fragment won't open their network, but it will unsettle it. It's like a key that's been ground down into a lockpick. I can't use it to broadcast a clear message, but I can use it to inject noise, static, ghosts. On the main screen, a star map of the sector appeared. Silas indicated a dozen different systems. The fragment is creating resonance frequencies, making their network unstable. I can't send a picture of Eden Prime, but I can make their official news feeds flicker with static. I can make their public announcements stutter and repeat. I can insert a single, sustained musical note, the first note of your symphony, into their comm channels. A ghost note that they can't trace and can't erase. She looked at Kalen, her eyes gleaming with a newfound, terrifying respect. "You wanted to start a whisper, Archivist. You've just given me the means to give the entire Ascendancy a case of tinnitus. A constant, maddening reminder that something is wrong." She leaned back in her chair. "Your ship will be repaired, properly, this time. Your fuel tanks will be filled. You have held up your end of the bargain." Then she leaned forward again, her smile vanishing. "And now I have a new offer for you. You've proven you can hurt them. You've made them aware of a weakness they never knew they had. The Vex will hunt you now with a religious fervor. You need more than a fast ship. You need an army." Her gaze was intense, a master predator recognizing a fellow hunter. "And I know where to find one." The Chimera, reborn, was a different beast. Silas, true to her word, had given it a proper overhaul. Not the crude patching of a scavenger, but the careful, artisanal work of a master shipwright. Its hull was now a seamless patchwork of Vex composite armor and hardened human alloys. its engines purring with a quiet, lethal efficiency. Silas's technicians had integrated the corrupted key fragment directly into the Chimera's systems, turning the entire ship into a mobile ghost, a key that could subtly disrupt Vex communications just by passing through a system. They were no longer just a library, they were a weapon of informational warfare. Silas's new offer echoed in Kalen's mind as they plotted their next course. She had told them of a place, a legend among the Outer Rim's forgotten colonies' haven. It was said to be a hidden world, a refuge for ex-military, scientists, and free thinkers who had escaped the Vex's initial purges, protected by a legendary piece of pre-ascendancy technology known as the Aegis Field, a defensive screen the Vex had never been able to penetrate. If they could find Haven, if they could convince its people to join their fight, they would have more than just a ship. They would have the seeds of a true resistance. The coordinates Silas provided were incomplete, a cryptic puzzle leading them not to a place, but to a person, a reclusive information broker known only as the Cartographer, who supposedly resided in the lawless asteroid city of Port Solitude. Finding him was their first test. Port Solitude was a hollowed-out asteroid, a vertical city of rickety gantries and flickering neon signs that plunged into a dimly lit abyss. It was a place of whispers and shadows, where allegiances were as fluid as the cheap synthale that flowed in its grimy cantinas. They found the Cartographer in a dusty, cluttered shop filled with ancient star charts and astrolabes, a frail, old man with eyes that seemed to hold the light of dead stars. "Haven," he rasped. When Kalen spoke the name, "That is a name I have not heard spoken in a long time. People seek it like a paradise. They do not understand. It is not a paradise. It is a promise. And a cage." He agreed to give them the final piece of the coordinates, but for a price that had nothing to do with credits. He pointed a trembling finger at the memory locus, which Kalen had brought with him, shielded in a protective case. "I want a memory," the old man said. "I charted the stars for 100 years, but I have never seen the world where I was born. My family was from a colony called Elysium. The Vex scrubbed it from every chart. Show me a blue sky." Kalen, without hesitation, interfaced the core and projected the images for him: rolling green hills, oceans of impossible blue, and a sky so vast and open it made the confines of the asteroid city feel like a tomb. The Cartographer watched, tears streaming down his wrinkled face, a lifetime of exile and loss contained in that single silent moment. He gave them the coordinates. The journey to Haven was through the uncharted nebula, a swirling maelstrom of stellar dust and gravitational anomalies that played havoc with sensors and navigation. It was a place where ships simply vanished. Jin piloted them with a virtuoso skill, her instincts guiding them through the cosmic storm where technology failed. As they neared the coordinates, Lazarus suddenly announced, "Unidentified energy field detected. It is elegant. A perfect, multi-layered resonance shield." They had found the Aegis. As the Chimera approached, a section of the shimmering, invisible field dissolved, opening a narrow corridor. A voice, calm and professional, hailed them. "Unidentified vessel, you have entered the Haven system. State your purpose." Kalen responded, his voice steady. "We are the Chimera. We are here to deliver a message." They were guided to a lush, green world, a jewel hidden within the nebula's heart. The city they landed in was a marvel of human ingenuity, built in harmony with the world's natural landscape. But as they were escorted to meet the ruling council, Kalen felt a growing sense of unease. The people of Haven were safe, yes, but they were also isolated. their society a perfect static museum of a time before the Vex. They had survived, but they had stopped living. The council was led by a woman named Ilara, a former admiral from the war, her face a mask of stern, weary authority. She listened patiently as Kalen told their story of the Starfall, the memory locus, the Vex relay, of Silas and the growing whispers of dissent in the galaxy. He projected the images of Eden Prime in the center of the council chamber, a vibrant ghost of a world they had all thought lost. When he was done, a heavy silence fell. "You have performed a great service, Archivist," Ilara said, her voice respectful but firm. "You have preserved a piece of our heritage. But you ask us to risk this." She gestured to the peaceful city around them. "For a war that was lost 30 years ago, we have a duty to protect our people, to preserve the last, best hope for humanity. We will not throw it away on a hopeless crusade." A council member added, "Your whispers are just noise. The Vex are an immovable object. To fight them is to sentence ourselves to the same fate as Eden Prime." Disappointment, cold and bitter, settled in Kalen's stomach. The cartographer was right. Haven wasn't a fortress. It was a cage, gilded with the illusion of safety. They had survived, but they had forgotten how to be brave. As they were preparing to leave, their mission a failure, an alarm sounded across the city. On the main screens in the command center, a Vex fleet appeared, dropping out of subspace at the edge of the nebula. Dozens of ships, led by a massive black vessel Kalen had never seen before, a Sanctifier-class ship, a vessel designed not just to purify, but to erase. "They followed you," Ilara accused, her calm demeanor shattered. "How is this possible? The Aegis is impenetrable." "It is," a new voice said, echoing from the Chimera's open comms. It was Silas. "But your little paradise has been broadcasting a low-level energy signature for decades. Efficient, but consistent. I sold that signature to the highest bidder years ago. The Vex. They've been waiting, studying, looking for a way in. Your arrival was just the final piece of the puzzle they needed to pinpoint the source." Betrayal, sharp and absolute, cut through Kalen. Silas hadn't just helped them, she had used them as bait. She had flushed them out, forcing Haven into a corner. On the screen, the Vex's Sanctifier fired a single, sustained beam of energy at the Aegis field. It wasn't a weapon meant to break the shield, but a resonance beam tuned to a specific frequency. Silas's voice continued, cold and calculating. "The Aegis is perfect, but perfection is brittle. They can't break it, but they can harmonize with it. They are going to tune their beam to the shield's frequency and pass right through it. They have about an hour." Panic erupted in the council chamber. Haven's military was a defense force, designed to fight within the shield, not to face a full Vex fleet. They were doomed. When Kalen saw the truth, this was not a betrayal. It was a test. Silas hadn't sold them out. She had engineered a choice. Stay in the cage and die, or break the cage and fight. He turned to Ilara, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "You were right, Admiral. I was asking you to fight a hopeless crusade. I was asking you to fight for the past. But the Vex are here, now, and they are not going to stop with your shield. They are going to scour this world of every book, every song, every memory, until it is as if you never existed. Fight for the past and you will lose, but fight for the future. Fight for a universe where a child can see a blue sky and know its name, and you have a chance." He looked at the faces around him, at the fear giving way to a dawning, terrible resolve. Reese, his hand resting on a console, looked at the schematics of the Aegis generator. "We can't stop the beam, but we can overload the generator. We can turn the shield itself into a weapon, a single focused pulse. It would shatter the Aegis, but it would take out that lead ship." "It's suicide," an officer said. "The feedback would destroy half our fleet." Jin's voice cut through the debate, clear and sharp from the Chimera's bridge. "Then don't use your fleet. Use ours." The plan was simple, insane, and the only one they had. The Chimera, its unique systems now their greatest asset, would fly to the heart of the Aegis generator. Reese would interface directly with it, using the ship's power core to help shape and direct the overload. Kalen would use the memory locus, not to broadcast a symphony this time, but to create a data bomb of pure, chaotic human memory, feeding it into the overload to disrupt the Vex command ship systems at the moment of impact. Jin would pilot them through the collapsing energy field. As the Chimera flew towards its destiny, the ships of Haven rose to meet the Vex, not to win, but to buy time. The battle was a desperate, beautiful, and terrible thing. The sky above Haven, a sky that had been peaceful for 30 years, was now filled with fire and light. Aboard the Chimera, they reached the generator. As Reese began the overload sequence, the ship shuddered, alarm screaming. The energy pouring into their systems was tearing them apart. "It's now or never, K." And Reese roared over the din. Kalen placed his hands on the memory locus. He closed his eyes and thought of Eden Prime, of Elysium, of Earth itself. He pushed it all into the stream, every poem, every equation, every baby's first steps, every declaration of love, every cry of defiance. The raw, beautiful, terrible chaos of humanity. "Jin, take us home," he yelled. The Aegis field collapsed, not fading, but shattering inwards, focusing into a single, blinding lance of pure energy that shot out from the planet and struck the Vex Sanctifier. In the silent void, the massive ship was consumed by a light it could not comprehend. And then there was only darkness. When Kalen awoke, it was to the gentle hum of a medical bay. He was on Haven. Reese and Jin were there, bruised and battered, but alive. The Chimera, they told him, was gone, sacrificed in the blast, its mission complete. The Vex fleet, its command ship destroyed and its systems ravaged by the data bomb's psychic shrapnel, had retreated in disarray. Haven was saved, but it was no longer a sanctuary. Its shield was gone. It was part of the galaxy again, vulnerable and exposed. Alara stood at the foot of his bed. The weariness was gone from her eyes, replaced by a fire Kalen recognized. "You were right," she said. "We were so busy preserving the ashes of humanity that we forgot to tend the flame." No more. In the days that followed, a new plan was forged. The fleets of Haven, combined with Silas's network of spies and smugglers, would form the core of a new alliance. The memory locus was duplicated, its content spreading from system to system, a contagion of truth. The whisper had become a roar. The avalanche had begun. Kalen, no longer just an archivist, was given command of a new ship, a sleek vessel built by the shipwrights of Haven. It was faster, stronger, and better armed than the old rust bucket. But as he stood on its pristine bridge, looking out at the stars, he knew what he would name it. The Chimera, too, because they were all chimeras, now a fusion of past and future, of soldier and poet, of pragmatist and dreamer. Their war was far from over, but for the first time in a generation, Humanity was no longer a footnote in someone else's history. They were writing their own story again, a story of defiance, of memory, and of the unquenchable, stubborn hope that even in the deepest darkness, a single spark could set the entire galaxy alight.